The following podcast may contain adult language and an abundance of salt. So get ready, nerds, because we're talking Loki, Episode 6, the season finale. Welcome and thank you for joining us today on the Salty Nerd Podcast. We're going to be talking about the season finale of the Disney Plus series Loki. And I'm joined, as always, by my fantastic panel of nerds, starting with Matt Vader, 74, the salty one himself. Welcome, sir.
Hi.
How are you doing?
This is the last one, right?
Yes, it is.
Thank God.
It is the last one.
It is the last one.
Also joined by Jude, the ambassador of estrogen. Welcome.
Hi.
You ready to talk about this one?
Yeah.
Awesome. And Matthew Kadish.
The more I think about this episode, the better it gets. And I can't wait to break down all my theories for you guys so you can tell me how stupid I am.
Strangely enough, though, I think you'll be surprised.
Is it going to take you longer than 20 minutes?
Yes.
It might.
It's going to be it's going to be the Matthew Kadish show today.
I'm just going to leave. I'm out. I don't care.
Did you bring a balloon for your replacement?
Yeah.
I should, right?
We should. All right, guys, before we dive into the deep spoilers of the season finale, we're going to take a quick break to listen to some sponsors. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Hey, if you'd like to support the podcast, if you're a longtime listener and you love our content, go to saltynerdclub.com. You can find our Patreon page there. You can join our club, get access to a lot of exclusive stuff, behind-the-scenes photos, blooper reels, and all kinds of cool stuff. And you get access to our Patreon-only Discord server as well. So pick a tier, whatever you can give us would be fantastic. We really do appreciate it, and it helps us make more content for you. Our goal, of course, is to reach 1,000 Patreon subscribers so that me and Vader don't have to go to our day job anymore, and we can just have fun and make great content for you guys to enjoy during your day. So that's our goal. If you can help us reach it, please do, saltynerdclub.com. And all right, Jude, I'm sorry, no, it's Kadish this time. Kadish, the season finale, take it away, sir.
All right, so this is Loki Season 1, Episode 6, entitled For All Time, Always. And this is what the members of the TVA, it's kind of their mantra. It's what they always say to one another.
It's like, may the force be with you.
Exactly. So basically, this is the culmination of all 6 episodes where we finally get the payoff. We get to meet the big bad at the end of time. We get to see Loki and Sylvie team up. But the first thing that I wanted to ask you guys about is, so beyond the big cloud thing that eats everything, Alioth.
Yeah.
Alioth?
Yeah, so we're introduced to the Citadel at the end of time. And when Loki and Sylvie enter the Citadel, we're met with Miss Minutes. And when we saw this, Jude shouted out, "I knew it!" and so like we were led to believe momentarily that Miss Minutes was behind everything, but she was actually sent by the real big bad to kind of tempt Loki and Sylvie with a offer to put them back into the time stream, just like they were never variants to begin with.
She's definitely a second in command minion of the big bad.
Yeah. So what did you guys think of the Citadel at the end of time and this little temptation by Miss Minutes?
Can I pause for a second? Because I would just like to start off the show by saying, I fucking told you so, Alex. It's not going to be a woman sitting in the chair with her big bad vagina scaring everyone who likes Marvel.
No, but a big bad vagina did kill the giant penis at the end of the episode. So there's that. I'm just kidding. I don't know. Okay. No, I was wrong. I made a joke last week. For those of you who don't know, I made a joke last week that I thought it would be a woman who was the big bad, and it would be one of those classic Disney subversion of expectations. But I was wrong, so that's cool. I'm all right with that. I'm okay with being wrong. For me, the Miss Minutes thing was all right. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys.
As opposed to.
Fair enough.
I'm just going to take a moment to bullshit, y'all.
Didn't like this episode the first time I watched it. I thought it was just a freaking boring-ass 45-minute exposition dump about all the questions we had, and they were like, here's your answers, and then that was it. And I was kind of like, oh my God, that was freaking super dull, and it was really disappointing for an ending. And then I watched it again, and I was like, there's a lot of like subtext, deeper things going on here. And it got a lot more interesting the more I kind of dived into it. And it redeemed itself for me on the second watch, which I was completely shocked. I did not expect that to happen. I was checked out. I was probably as checked out as Vader was last week. I was like, this is freaking stupid. I'm done. And then this episode, like, again, the first time I watched it, I was like, oh God, eye roll, whatever. It's finally over. Okay. And then I watched it again and I started doing some research. I started watching some of the videos and getting into the lore and, you know, the consequences of what happened in this episode. And I'm like, okay, all right, there's some cool shit going on here. I started to really appreciate it. I liked the majority of this episode, surprisingly enough. But the Miss Minutes thing I thought was interesting because it shows just how much control they have, because she's like offering to rewrite reality for them on the fly. Like, hey, you want to beat Thanos? You want to beat the Master of the Universe? We can do that for you. Like, fuck, what? How do you do that? Like, it was a lot.
Or it could have been a trick.
It could have been a trick, but I feel like they might be telling the truth on that one. Because, I mean, they literally have control of the timeline. They can do whatever they want. And whatever they call a variant, they can change their mind and say, well, that's not actually a variant anymore. That's the true timeline. That's what we call it. So it's very interesting, the amount of power that these people have. So I thought it was interesting. You're looking at me with daggers in your eyes. Like,
No, they're not daggers. I feel the same way I did about this show as I did the whole way through. Even now that it's over with, I'm just thoroughly confused. I don't know what's going on, and I need someone to explain it to my second grade brain.
Last
You,
week,
Kadish.
last week, when we were talking about our kind of predictions for the finale, knowing the comic book lore, so like I knew about the Citadel at the end of time. I knew that the guy who is, you know, in that Citadel, his name is in the comics Immortus. And Immortus is basically the final incarnation of Kang the Conqueror. Like, he's the king that won and became immortal and you know, lived in the Citadel and stuff like that. And so they had been following the comic lore really closely for the TVA and all this stuff up to this point. So my guess was like we were going to meet Immortus, which was, you know, He Who Remains. I didn't expect them to have like this version of Kang, played by Jonathan Majors, who was from like Lovecraft Country and stuff like that. But
that's where I saw him.
Yeah, but okay. when I saw him appear, I was like, that's Kang. And so, Jude, you were also right, where you basically said like Kang's in there.
Yes, I'll take your accolades now.
So basically, like in the comic books, the way it works is you have the Citadel at the end of time, which is the last remaining kind of like bastion of sanctuary in limbo, and it exists at the point where like all things end. And Immortus, or He Who Remains, is like the final Time Lord guy. And the Avengers in the comics, basically in their battle with Kang, or I should say Thor and the Asgardians in their battle with what were called the Time Twisters, which was the first incarnation of the Time Keepers, who were basically trying to rewrite time in order to preserve their existence, go to the Citadel at the end of time to meet with He Who Remains to get him to get rid of the Time Twisters. And so he does, and he creates the Time Keepers, which he sends to the beginning of time. And so the Time Keepers from the beginning of time onward are the ones in charge of the time stream up until the point it repeats where he basically, you know, is at the end of time again. And so it was kind of interesting to see how they wove the comic mythology into the show. And if you look at this episode in particular, like I've watched it maybe 3 or 4 times now, and it is fascinating. Like Alex said, all the subtext that they wove into this thing. And we're going to get into some of the really intricate stuff as we go along talking about this episode. But basically, after Miss Minutes kind of does the last temptation of Loki, you know, they refuse Miss Minutes and they move onward. And then the next thing we know, Miss Minutes goes to Renslayer, who's in her office at the TVA. And she's like, I got those files that you requested. And Renslayer's like, these aren't the files I requested. And she said, oh, well, he thinks these are going to be more useful for you. And then Miss Minutes disappears. And you're like, oh, who sent these files and what are they and how are they going to be useful to Renslayer?
And it's clear that Renslayer doesn't know who sent the files either.
Yeah, so she's unaware of Kang at this point. So what do you guys think were the files that were sent to her, Alex?
I have not even the slightest idea. I don't know. This episode, for all of its like inner connected dialogue and subtext and stuff. Like, I've lost all theory crafting when it comes to this show because it literally could go anywhere, and I'm kind of at a loss. I really don't. I'm just kind of along for the ride at this point.
So we're going to get back to this moment later on, but just remember that Kang sent Renslayer these files. So Kang has a plan. Okay, and we're going to get back to this part of the plan later on.
Yeah. Okay,
Kadish is getting ready to break this down. I can feel it.
Yeah.
Go for
So
it.
the next thing that we see is basically Loki and Sylvie kind of make their way through the Citadel, and we see these 4 statues, and 3 of the statues are of the Timekeepers, but there's a 4th statue that's been broken. It's on the floor in pieces, which I thought was really interesting because it makes you think: was there a 4th Timekeeper? What happened to that one? Do you guys have any theories on that?
I didn't even notice there was a broken.
I didn't either.
Well, there was.
Okay.
So, you know, you could argue that the 4th one was Kang, and you know, he was, or there was a time where where Kang dethroned the Timekeepers. So you could argue that the Timekeepers existed at some point, and Kang killed them, and maybe, like, you know, his statue was the one that was broken because he was the one who betrayed the Timekeepers. It's unclear, but there could be a 4th Timekeeper out there, which would be interesting.
But the 3 Timekeepers were fake. They were robots.
Well, they were fake at this point.
But at some point in time, they were still real.
You could argue that the dogma was that, you know, the Timekeepers were, like, actually existing at some point, and Kang killed them and took over.
I agree with that. And I kind of had a theory about in the first episode when they're like, go through here and verify that you're not a robot. I was like, that's interesting. Is it because the Timekeepers weren't robots at a certain point, and now that they are robots, Kang's trying to keep out any other pesky robots from coming in and mucking things up?
Yeah, so that's an interesting theory. So basically, the Timekeepers were the illusion of control, because a lot of the stuff in Loki is about villains are all about, you know, illusion. They're all about making people believe stuff that isn't true in order to retain their power. And in this episode, Kang even says to them, it's like, we're all villains here. We've all done terrible things, but this is your chance to do a terrible thing for the right reason. And so you can see, like, his thought process where he's like, okay, yeah, I did everything that you guys did, but I did it because it was the only way to keep reality from destroying itself.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's kind of one of the interesting things about this show is that Loki, you know, he's always been a villain. And even in the first episode where he talks about, like, you know, I'm a villain. And throughout these 6 episodes, we see him transition from just being a villain whose only purpose is to bring the best out of heroes into an actual, like, you know, complex character who has an arc where at the end of the episode, he was given the chance to finally get his throne and not just rule over, like, the 9 realms or Midgard or whatever. He was going to get to rule over the entire existence, where he, you know,
which is originally what he wanted when he found out that there were Timekeepers.
When he's like, is this the greatest power in the universe?
Yeah,
like,
he was like, I'm going to overthrow them and I'm going to rule over everything. And by the end, he's like,
sad,
I choose not to.
Crying in the corner, got friend zoned by himself.
Well, we're going to get to that in a minute. But this is the interesting thing is, so, like, there was a 4th Timekeeper statue that was broken. We don't know who that was, but then the big bad reveals himself from the elevator, and it turns out that it is he who remained. Now, they never actually name him Kang in this episode.
He refers to himself as a conqueror, though.
Well, he says, I've been called many names, and Conqueror was one of them. And we know that this actor was cast in the next Ant-Man movie as Kang. Mm-hmm. So it's obviously Kang. It's a version of Kang.
Yep.
And basically this is what I would call the character of Immortus from the comic books, because he's the Kang that makes it all the way to the end. So
he's the Kang who remains.
Yes, he's the Kang who remains. And I thought Jonathan Majors did a great job with this character.
I did too. He was very entertaining to watch. Like, as far as, like, when it's kind of a trope nowadays where you get the villain and the villain goes on some monologue about their whole glorious plan of how they're going to defeat the bad guy or the good guys and whatnot. Like, you kind of get that in this episode, But the way it's done, it's very clever. A lot of the dialogue is very deep and suggestive. God, I can't talk.
Suggestive. Yeah.
Suggestive of other things going on. So it was more interesting than I gave it credit to for the first time I watched it.
And a lot of the complaints about this episode is that it was very exposition heavy.
Yeah,
It was.
But I feel like this was the most interesting introduction to a big villain that I've ever seen. Like
ever?
Like with Thanos.
Those are strong words.
I guess I would say ever in the Marvel universe.
Okay.
Because with Thanos, like we got hints of Thanos, but he was always kind of like this big imposing guy who the less we knew about him, the more intimidating he was. With Kang, they basically just set out this version of him and was like, okay, we're going to explain to you, or at least we're going to set up this bad guy in this episode. And that's what it was devoted to. Kind of like how Infinity War was basically Thanos' movie.
Mm-hmm.
This was Kang's episode. And I really liked how they portrayed him because he was very disarming. He wasn't like the mega maniacal conqueror that we know from the comics. At this point, like he'd won and he'd been the winner for a long time. And he was ready to kind of give up.
There's even an argument to be said that he's not even a bad guy in this version of himself. Because he saw the multiverse of madness and all the pain and suffering it caused, and he was the one who was able to call that back and turn it into just the prime, and I guess not eliminate, but kind of mitigate the amount of suffering that happens in the universe because he defeated the rest of the more evil versions of himself.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this episode is that we learn the truth about the multiversal war and Kang's role in it. And basically we find out that before Kang discovered the idea of the multiverse, everything was kind of in harmony. And it wasn't until he started crossing over into different multiverses and meeting different versions of himself that the strife started. And so like he was the origin of that strife. And one of the interesting things about this is that, one of the themes throughout this show has been free will versus predestination. And Kang has been the one who's basically been pulling the strings. And he even tells Loki and Sylvie, like, you didn't beat my game. You might be variants, but you're variants because, or everything you've done since you became a variant has been the path that I've been leading you on. So he doesn't say that they don't have free will and that like they haven't been acting of their own choice, because the very nature of variance is that, time can't be constrained. And so these people, because of their free will, can break off and create these branches. But he has created circumstances for them to follow that brings them back in line with what his ultimate overall plan is.
And according to that little monologue that he had, he wanted them to find him, right? Is that what you took away from that?
So basically, one of the things that Kang has been doing for his endgame is that he wants someone to get him to get to the point that both Loki and Sylvie did. And so he tested out a bunch of different variants. And so like you could say that he's the one who was causing each one of these variants to happen, because he was kind of testing to see like, is this the person I need to do this? Is this the person I need to do this? And it wasn't until he found out that he needed both Loki and Sylvie that he was like, okay, now my plan can proceed. And so once those two came together, he started leading them along the path that he wanted them to follow. And so basically you can look at Kang as like the big orchestrator of all the variants and the TVA and all that stuff. So like he was the mind behind all that. They were all following his plan. And if you look at the background of Kang's office, you see a lot of circles, a lot of circular shapes and stuff like that. And when he's explaining the multiversal war and him coming out victorious after he tamed Elias.
It's a sphere.
Yeah.
Or not a sphere, but a ring around him.
Yeah, there's a ring around him. And when he's talking about that, and you see that, he's talking about the sacred timeline that he created. Mm-hmm. And so there's this idea that time is not linear, it's circular. It's the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And so the idea that the Citadel at the end of time isn't actually where time ends, it's where time dies and then is reborn. And so there's this concept that the multiverse has to happen in order for the original timeline to end, so that it can be brought back into a new beginning of that singular timeline. And I've been thinking about this a lot because at the very first episode of this season, when Loki's brought before Judge Renslayer, he's like, well, the Avengers, broke the rules. They traveled through time. Why aren't they being judged. And she's like, well, that was supposed to happen. And so as I was thinking about it, basically Kang's ultimate plan is basically either the Lokis fall in line and things continue on as they were, in which case he wins, or he dies, the multiverse happens, and a new war occurs. And that in that case, he's just going to end up back where he was before, because one version of him is eventually going to end up victorious. But what if the Avengers were supposed to travel through time so that they could learn how to combat all the different versions of Kang that they're going to be running into? And that's why that was supposed to happen, as opposed to it just being, a weird retcon of the Avenger universe. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
No. No, it does in its own way. I just wish, like, the way you're explaining it, it sounds fascinating, and it sounds like they took a lot of time in kind of mapping out how they wanted this to end and what it was going to mean for the future of the MCU. But I'm kind of like, I don't know if I'm just checked out, or if I kind of jumped off at Endgame and I'm like, I had my fun in the MCU and now I'm ready to move on. I'm not as enthralled with this show as I see a lot of other people on like YouTube and TikTok when they explain all this stuff. They get super excited about it, kind of like the way you are right now, like diving into the nitty gritty, deepness of this episode. I'm just kind of like,
I think it's too complicated for me. There's too much stuff going on. I guess I like my overarching stories to be a little simpler. I don't know what else.
A little too subtle for you.
Well, I think that this is setting up like where the MCU is going in Phase 4, probably more than anything we've yet seen. And this whole concept. So there's a point where basically He Who Remains stops knowing what's going to happen. Yeah. He's like, we crossed the threshold. And if you look at what's happening in that scene, so outside, the timeline starts branching. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, we know for a fact that Kang had a plan. And in fact, he even sows the seeds of, Sylvie distrusting Loki, where he's like, you can't trust him. Right. And Loki's like, don't listen to him. He's lying. And he's like, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. So, he's playing the two Lokis like a fiddle. And then the minute that he doesn't know what's going to happen, you see all these branching timelines start to occur, which means that he doesn't know what happens as soon as free will starts being introduced into the sacred timeline. And it's not a single timeline that he can predict anymore. And if you go back to that scene where Miss Minutes sent Renslayer, down a different path, and the last thing she says to Mobius before she leaves through the time portal is, he's like, where are you going? And she's like, in search of free will.
Where are you going to go?
In search of free will.
So if you look at Kang's plan, he sent Renslayer somewhere to create the multiverse. Like, she's the impetus for basically the point where the threshold has been crossed and he no longer knows what's going to happen. Huh. And so like his plan is coming to fruition, and it culminates in basically the Lokis having to make a decision. And if you look at like the previous episode, the penultimate episode, if you will.
No shot.
I can't do any more shots.
If you look at that episode, one of the things that original Loki always complained about is that all the Lokis always fall into the same traps of who they are, which is, duplicitous. You can't trust them. They're selfish. They're always going after their glorious purpose. That's the most important thing in the world to them. And they never deviate from that. And if they do, they get pruned. But the interesting thing is that Sylvie falls into that trap where her glorious purpose has always been to get revenge for her life being stolen by killing whoever's in charge of the TVA. And she has a single mind to do that when she meets Kang, and she's like, I want to kill this guy. And even after Kang explains the consequences of him dying, she still is dead set on her glorious purpose. Whereas our Loki, the, variant MCU Loki, he realizes that this is, something that could have terrible consequences for the entire universe. And he's willing to give up his glorious purpose, which is to, sit on a throne and rule, in order to basically just think about things for a minute. Like, let's not act so brash. Now, when he does that, Sylvie views that as a betrayal. And that's the one thing that she was scared that he would do from the previous episode, is ultimately betray her. And Kang sowed that little seed of doubt in her mind. And so you can tell Kang wanted her to kill him.
Yeah.
That was his ultimate end game. And the only one who could stop her is Loki, right? And he almost did, except that she betrayed him by, they had that kiss. Loki is the only person that he could ever love as himself. But if you remember back in the midpoint episode where they're on that planet that's being crashed into by the moon, they have this talk about what is love. And Loki, in his drunkenness, he's like, love is a dagger. It's a weapon that can be wielded far away or up close. You can see yourself in it. It's beautiful. And until it makes you bleed. And ultimately, when you reach for it, it isn't real. And that moment after they kiss, Loki, what's he doing? He's looking at him, a version of himself. It's beautiful. And then she makes him bleed by betraying him. She became the type of Loki that just fell into.
She stayed true to their original version.
Yeah, Loki always betrayed the ones that he cared for, or who loved him the most. And that's what happened. That's why you see that great moment where Tom Hiddleston, after he realizes what happened, he's kind of like coming to grips with it. And he realized that what he had for her wasn't real, but he still wants to save her, because his new purpose as a hero is not to rule. It's not to betray people. It's basically to save the one thing that he actually loves, which is Sylvie, aka himself. But it's a very kind of mature theme that they're showing here, because once Sylvie actually kills Kang, and he has that great line where he's like, I'll see you soon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not going to be that version of him, but it's going to be a version. There's this moment where it's almost tragic, because she achieved her purpose and she's like, well, now what?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She falls to the floor and she's just kind of like.
And she realizes that she betrayed Loki, who she loved, in order to do this. And it was an empty victory.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, like when I was rewatching this and I was picking up on all these themes and kind of like theories about what's happening in Kang's ultimate plan, because Kang wants the multiverse war to happen again, because it needs to happen in order for order to be restored and the timeline to be restarted anew. Now, just because we're talking about the end of time and beginning of time doesn't mean that all this stuff that happened before isn't going to happen, because it already happened. But what comes next needed to, like the chaos needed to ensue in order to bring out a new order. And the Avengers are going to be playing a role in that coming forward. And so I just thought that this episode was so deep and so interesting.
Yeah.
And you could even like go back and watch it like a billion more times and probably pick up new stuff.
There was a video that I watched that broke it down in a different way. It was more of a religious theme, where in the second episode, we see Morbius look at the stained glass window of the devil.
That was the first episode.
It was the first episode. And they were like, oh, that's freaking Kang the Conqueror. If you look, when you first get introduced to Kang in this episode, the elevator door opens and he's sitting in the exact same pose that the stained glass window had the devil sitting in. Super like weird, cool little connections from the first episode to the last episode. And then the whole conversation between, you have the devil who's tempting. Basically, you would have Sylvie and Loki as Adam and Eve, and the devil is tempting them. And Eve is the one who bites the apple and takes the bait and basically does what the devil wants her to do. And Adam is left and he gets kicked out of like the Garden of Eden. There's a lot of these weird, like super deep subtext to this episode that on first watch, I was like, oh my God. And then I started diving into it and I started doing a little bit of research, and then I'm listening to Kadish talking. I'm like, God damn, they either like really thought this out a long time ahead of time, and this is all
Or
like
the fans are.
very deep, or we're just reading a ton into it. Like, I mean, we've done that before with some of the other shows, but this one I feel like is the only one that really holds up to those theories.
I feel like this first season was not a wow for me, but I feel like it was necessary to set up what's coming. So I'm still on board and I'm still into it, but I don't feel like I'm as blown away and excited about each episode. But I feel like each episode is really necessary to how the story evolves from here.
Yeah.
I feel like this show, more than the other two Marvel TV shows, WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier, did more to set up what's coming in Phase 4 than anything.
Yeah.
And that to me is what's really fascinating, because the big twist at the end of this one is that when Loki goes back to the TVA,
that was my favorite part.
yeah, it's an alternate timeline, and Mobius doesn't recognize him, neither does Hunter B-15. And instead of the timekeepers, it's a statue of Kang, which means that this is a whole new, different TVA that Loki is now a part of, because Sylvie killing him changed the timeline. And now we've got multiple different versions of Kang out there, just like in the comics. And it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out, because the end credit scene for this episode was just the announcement that there is going to be a season 2 of Loki.
Yeah. And I got to say,
I can't wait.
Of all the three,
Shut up, V.
of the three Marvel shows that
amazing.
we've watched, this is the only one that I'm even remotely interested in seeing a season 2 for.
I'm going
Like,
to sit there and go,
Falcon and it is it's a dense episode. There's a lot going on here, and that can't be denied. If it's too much for like a popcorn sit down and watch comic book stuff, I get it. I understand where you're coming from, but I have to give him credit, because
I feel like I got to go watch this whole series again and then probably rewatch it again.
you might have to. I mean, even shit, dude. There's YouTubers that are like way more into this shit than we are that can break this down line by line.
I
Which
just can't do it.
I used to be into that kind of stuff. I'm not so much anymore, but I used to watch hours of content breaking down episodes from
I feel
TV
like
shows.
we're going into a place with the MCU to where when I quit reading comic books, there's too much stuff going on over too many comic book titles.
Earth 52.
Too many different variants here and there. I couldn't keep up, and I got confused, and I just got to the point where I wasn't interested anymore, and I couldn't afford it. And I kind of feel that's where I'm at with the MCU now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's too confusing, and I just when you lose my brain, you lose me, and I just don't care. So I don't know what I'm going to do with this MCU stuff anymore. If I have any interest in it at all. I mean, this has been the Kadish show. I haven't said a word because I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm done with these shows. It doesn't entertain me. It just makes me get confused, and I might as well be a red balloon on a string sitting over here, because that's how I feel with this stuff. So
I'll say that I think what this is setting up, you can think whatever you want about this episode in particular, but what this is setting up for the new Marvel movies, there's one thing I really am looking forward to, and it's the ability of bringing multiple different Marvel franchises that may have been owned by different people in the past, and kind of like merging them all back together. One thing in particular,
this is 100% how we're going to get Fantastic Four and
Fantastic
X-Men.
Four, X-Men, Spider-Man. If we can get a Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield in the next Spider-Man movie as like cameos, is that confirmed?
Yeah.
I thought that was just a fan theory.
It's a secret.
It's a secret. Dude, if that happens, I'm legit. I'm gonna be freaking excited. It's like, if they actually manage to pull that off, and then they could also mix the Venom movies with
It's just
Tom Holland, Spider-Man. Like,
I feel like it's just a bunch of gimmicks being thrown in together for movies to sell tickets, which is what it is.
Well, yeah.
But it's just come on.
I don't know. I don't blame them for doing it. I'd do it if I could.
I mean, I'm really impressed with the setup for what's coming, because we've known for a while that the next Doctor Strange movie is called The Multiverse of Madness. It's going to be dealing directly with all the multiversal stuff. But it looks like, Spider-Man No Way Home and all these other Marvel movies that are coming out before that could be dealing with the multiverse in terms of like introducing like what the consequences of this Loki series are.
And you think
if we don't get that, everyone is going to start flipping tables across the world.
Can you imagine if they do all this setup in this show and then that doesn't actually happen in the rest of the movies?
Yeah.
Or there's no connection whatsoever?
Yeah.
Like if Kang the Conqueror is the new Thanos for the Phase 4,
Maybe
right?
Bad.
Is that what we're going with?
Listen, if I'm a person who doesn't watch a lot of TV and I go to a movie and this is required watching before I go watch the Doctor Strange movie, I'm going to be kind of annoyed.
I don't know if it'll be required.
You know what I mean? It's just
it's kind of like just supplementary. Like you could watch it if you wanted to, and you'll have better appreciation for the movie, but you can still watch the movie.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it depends. They could go down that route. They could go full freaking Disney Marvel and be like, you have to watch everything we put out there in order to appreciate it. But
And
I just
honestly, in the world we live in today, everybody has a phone and everybody has YouTube. Just look up a synopsis if you didn't watch the shows.
Yeah. You can watch this episode. This ridiculous drunken podcast. Do you guys, Kadish, is there anything that you didn't like about this episode? You seem to be really enthralled with this, which is kind of cool. I'm happy for you. Is there anything that you didn't like about this episode?
Not really. I've been enjoying this series, I think, more than any of you guys.
That's apparent.
Yeah. But it's just because like I've been so fascinated with the planning that I'm seeing behind a lot of these episodes. And this episode, more than any of the other ones, the way they set up Kang and the way they set the stage for the next phase of Marvel and stuff like that, like it was really sophisticated, surprisingly. And when I went through it, like each time I went through it, like I noticed something new. Like there's a little chalkboard in Kang's office with like this mathematical equation on it. And I kept trying to freeze frame on it and be like, what is that? what is he planning?
Oh, that's super nerd stuff.
Yeah,
I love it.
yeah. But like, there was just so much great setup on this. And, we got a good cliffhanger ending. And one of the cool things about Kang as a character is that there are an infinite number of versions of him. And so you could say that he could appear in every Marvel movie going forward for the next phase. And it's a different Kang. And, I just kept thinking about Endgame where like we got that different version of Thanos coming into, the reality after the one Thanos had actually died. And in a way that kind of sets up what Kang is capable of, where you have like, no character's ever truly dead because there's always a variant option for them. And the whole kind of like free will versus predestination thing that they had going on, that theme, I just found that fascinating, the way that they were able to kind of navigate that, because they never negated the idea of free will. And in fact, the whole kind of Loki motivation throughout this series was to like free the timeline and give people free will once more, instead of being forced to follow a set path by the TVA, which is like the fascist organization that's been controlling time since the beginning. And now we get to see like the true fallout of ultimate free will. And it's kind of like, do you want anarchy because that's the ultimate free will, or do you want some order? Is there some balance to be struck? And I think that the MCU version of Loki, who at the end of the day was trying to, prevent Sylvie from making that type of mistake, I think he realized that there needed to be some type of like middle ground there. And it was his chance to actually, rule. And like, he was offered everything he wanted from the very first episode, where he's like, I was destined to rule. The Infinity Stones were going to give me the power over the universe and stuff like that. And when he's finally offered that, he chooses not to take it because he wants to save this version of himself that he's come to have actual feelings for. So I just found this entire series was very mature and interesting and had like very deep themes and motivations. And you can tell a lot of thought went behind it, especially considering the fact that they stick so closely to the comic book lore. Like, it's really impressive what they were able to do with these obscure comic book kind of like references. And I'm super excited to see what they do with the second season on this. So I was a big fan.
Right on.
There's a timeline where Tony Stark is still alive.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. This opens up the door where if they back up enough money to all these actors.
Natasha's still alive.
Yeah. They could bring any of these characters back for a new movie and be like, oh, this is a variant version of Captain America or Iron Man or whatever. And, bring back some of these legacy MCU
but
characters.
Then that diminishes the character that we all fell in love with. To me,
it could.
It's like, that's not our Tony.
You're not wrong.
Let me ask you guys, what was your ultimate grade for the season as a whole?
I don't know if I have a full grade for the whole show. I will say it's definitely the number one out of the three that we've gotten from MCU so far. Falcon and Winter Soldier is the bottom of the barrel. WandaVision is the middle, and this is the top one. It was the most visually interesting. The storyline, although I kind of it lost me a little bit during the middle, I think it kind of redeemed itself with the last couple episodes. I was surprised at how much I really kind of dove into this one. I kind of agree with Vader, though. It seems a little inaccessible because there's so much going on. and so much subtext that it's very easy.
I like how you put that.
It's very easy.
I'm going to go with that.
It's difficult to kind of grasp because you're like there's not one thing that you can focus on.
I haven't been able to talk about this show because I just don't know how to put into words how it makes me feel. It's just so.
It's not very accessible unless you're
it's
big
just,
brain Kadish.
Yeah, it's
very
like
cerebral.
Mega mind over there.
Yeah.
It's like this show makes me feel dumb. Okay, that's what it does. It makes me feel dumb, and I don't appreciate it.
Okay.
And yeah, if I had to grade this show,
is it better than the last two we watched? Do you think?
I haven't really liked any of these Marvel shows.
Yeah, it's been a reoccurring thing with you.
It's just, I don't know. I think
The show has offended Vader.
It's not. It hasn't offended me. It's just made me feel stupid. And I don't know. Probably a C. I mean, it is kind of cool visually, and Owen Wilson was fun. And I probably
we never got a jet ski.
Probably saw somebody's boobs in another movie. So
we never got a jet ski in this.
I need that jet ski closure.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
there's always season 2.
There's always season 2. Jude, how about you? Between all the MCU TV shows that we gotten, where would you put this one?
So a bit conflicted because, as you know, I hated Falcon and Winter Soldier so very much.
Yeah.
So that's not even on the scale for me. But I feel like the difference between this and WandaVision for me, I was actually pretty excited about how WandaVision ended, and I was like, "Ooh!" Like from there, like I'm really excited for what can happen from there. Mm-hmm. And I thoroughly enjoyed the whole season. I thought it was really fun with the different genres. So I really liked WandaVision in that way, but it was more exciting for me than this was. But I feel like this season was more necessary than any of the other shows. So it's hard to give it a grade, like compared to each other, because they all gave me something different. Falcon and Winter Soldier gave me a fury of hatred within my soul that burns to this day. So I appreciate that. WandaVision gave me something to be really excited about. And like, I love Darcy and I love Wanda and like, I loved, what's the witch's name again?
Agatha.
I loved her and I loved the casting of that. And I loved the costuming and all of it. It was very fun.
Yeah, the gimmick of the show was good.
Fun for me. This wasn't as fun for me, but I feel like it had to happen. I'm excited for what happens in season 2 because I feel like in season 2 we're going to get some real good meat and potatoes. So was this exciting? No, but it's absolutely necessary. It's like the introduction to learning who the main players are before you start the game.
Okay.
Well, you know what's interesting is like, at least in the comic books, so Wanda is a Nexus being in the comics, which means that she is like consistent throughout all realities. Like she's like a focal point that never changes. There are no variant versions of her. There's just her. And in the comic books, Immortus, the final version of Kang, who's, he who remains, he views Wanda as the only true threat to the fabric of reality, to the sacred timeline. And so he basically makes her fall in love with Vision so that she can never reproduce, so that when she dies, there is no more Nexus being. And one of the interesting things about the WandaVision show is that, she has kids. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that episode, she's like, I got to find a way to get my kids back. And so there are lots of like interesting parallels with the comics in the sense that like her kids are part of the Young Avengers, which Sylvie in the comic books as Enchantress is a part of, and Hawkeye and stuff like that. So they're kind of laying the groundwork, with the new Black Widow and all these things for like the new Avengers or the Young Avengers or the Dark Avengers, whatever they want to call themselves. But they're introducing all the characters for that through these shows. And they're also introducing like a lot of comic book lore that isn't very well known. And the idea that Immortus, Kang the Conqueror from this episode, is directly involved with Wanda, and Wanda's directly involved with Mephisto and stuff like that. And there could be a coming together of that with the Multiverse of Madness Doctor Strange 2 movie. And then we haven't even factored in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. Mm-hmm. So like there's
Doctor Strange.
Yeah, there's so much stuff going on. And it's kind of funny because in the comic books, at least, Kang is Reed Richards' great-grandfather. or descendant of some, like he's somehow related to Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four. So they're setting the stage for a bunch of stuff. And if you're a comic book nerd and you know the lore, you're just like geeking out because you're like, oh my God, like they've done this and they've done that.
Yeah. See, that's the thing is I think I've run out of my comic book knowledge. Like when phase 1 and 2 of Marvel was going, I was kind of like, oh, I know some of this. This is part of my general knowledge of Marvel.
I think a lot of people knew this stuff in phase 1.
Bring that microphone close to you.
I think a lot of people knew this stuff in phase 1, at least in general.
Yeah.
This is some obscure stuff that they're getting into now.
Yeah. So it might be.
I'm wondering how much of their audience they're going to end up losing.
But at the same time, though, I think it's really cool that we have show creators that are sticking to source material and actually making something for the pure fans.
Now it's up to me. If I'm lost right now, if I'm lost with Loki,
I think that's really cool.
It's up to me to go, okay, I need to go educate myself on the comic books and find out where they could be going, some of the backstories. I don't know Kang the Conqueror. I don't know shit about him. I knew Thanos. I don't know this dude. So I need to go and kind of read up and learn about these new characters that they're introducing so that I'm a step ahead when the movies start coming out. And maybe that'll improve my enjoyment upon it.
There's actually a great episode of the animated Avengers TV show where they introduce Kang and they fight against him. I'm going to have to look up what that episode is, but it's worth checking out. It's a really good episode.
So I think moving forward, like I've said this a million times on these reviews and on the podcast and stuff, is like I've kind of jumped ship after Endgame. Like I was happy with my MCU experience, and now I'm moving on to other things. If I want to dive back into the MCU and get as invested as I was for phase 1 and 2, I need to start doing some research and figuring out.
This show has got me excited for phase 4. Like I feel like up until this point, it felt like Endgame was an ending, which it was, but now, death, birth, renewal, life, death, rebirth.
Yeah.
This is the rebirth of the MCU for me because I'm very excited for the next phase.
That's cool, man.
What's coming.
I'm glad you are. I was shocked, honestly, when you were like, dude, this episode is so cool. I'm like, holy shit. It brought us back.
That's what Kadish looks like when he's excited.
That's cool, man. That's cool. I'm happy for you.
Excited face.
I'm
weird.
I'm happy when other people get excited. Even if I'm not on board with it quite yet, I know that if I chose to dive into it, I would at least have something to have fun with. But I feel like I kind of want to focus on other things. There's so many other shows out there that I've been watching lately that are fantastic. And I'm like, I could take a break from the MCU for a little while and go check out other things. But I'm glad that they're, according to you, I'm glad that they're on track for a good phase 4. So that's good.
I think this is the last MCU show that we're going to be reviewing for a while. Like even new ones that come out, we're probably going to watch them, but we're not going to do shows on them.
Yeah, we're not going to do What If. That looks.
Well, it's a cartoon. It'd be too. For a podcast, as far as we're concerned, it's the saturation too of just everybody talking about it, and it's not always our bag. No. We have way more fun talking about obscure TV shows like C and Mythic Quest, things that not many other people are talking about. That's kind of our realm. So the MCU shows they're fine. They're a lot of, they're fun if you can get into them. And I hope that they stick the landing for the movies and stuff. But I think for the Salty Nerd podcast, we might be moving on to
greener pastures
and things that are more in our realm of entertainment and some stuff that can keep Vader interested and laughing. He's the heart and soul of this podcast. If he's not into it, it just kind of dies.
Oh, thank you. That's nice to know.
So, all right.
I need a raise, sir.
we pay you in shots.
Well, that's half my problem today because
you're coming down off the rope.
Jude just like destroyed me during the last show.
Yeah.
No, you could hang.
So yeah.
She gave us one shot of 151.
Yeah, but I had like 3.
I know, but
glasses of pirate hooch before that.
Stop asking me to make your drinks then.
We have a new secret drink, by the way.
Pirate hooch?
Look for
Look for the recipe online.
Look for the recipe online.
It's rum and Capri Sun.
It's awesome.
A little bit of lime juice.
Surprisingly good, guys. All right, that's it. That's our discussion for Loki. What did you think of the whole season? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Are you done with phase 4? Are you on board like Kadish over here? Are you just like, holy shit, they pulled it off. Let's get into it. Let us know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, share this video with your friends. And before we get out of here, Vader, where can they find you on the socials?
You can find me on the socials at Matt Vader 74 on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and on this channel on Saturday mornings around 10:30, playing some games and hanging out.
Right on. And Jude?
You can find me on the socials and the things at I am Jude Juju on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and you can find me at thevoiceofjude.com. You can check out my voiceover work.
Oh, Kadish. Sorry, go ahead, buddy.
Hey, you guys, Kadish is here too.
Yes. You can find me at Matthew Kadish, Kadish on Twitter and Getter. And you can also check out my books over at kadishbooks.com. Takes you to my Amazon page.
Right on, guys. And I'm the Salty Nerd. If you want to chat with me, you can head to our Discord channel. Go to saltynerddiscord.com. That'll take you to our server. Jump in there, hang out with us, talk. There's a whole bunch of new people just came in, so our chats are more active now. So hop on the conversation and join us, saltynerddiscord.com. I will be there to see you. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our Loki review. Stay tuned. I think we're going to start a new TV show, Season 2. That's coming up in August, guys. That's going to be a lot of fun.
We're good.
Join us. Join us for that review. All right, everybody. Stay salty, my friends.